The night she asked me to trust him, she didn't look guilty. That's the part that keeps replaying in my head. We were sitting on the edge of our bed, not touching. Her phone lay face down between us like a third presence. She kept rubbing her thumb over the corner of it, slow, distracted. I asked a simple question. She gave a simple answer: he's my best friend. I need you to trust him. Not trust her. Trust him. It was such a strange distinction that I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded. Because that's what stable, secure men do, right? They don't flinch at harmless friendships. They don't turn into jealous stereotypes. I had always believed I was that kind of man, but something in her tone felt rehearsed. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Just prepared. Like she had already argued with me in her head and won. I remember standing up and pacing to the window. The streetlights outside flickered against the glass. I tried to pinpoint what exactly was bothering me. He had been around for years. He was funny, attentive, always slightly too comfortable in our apartment, and I had never had a reason to doubt either of them, so why did that request feel less like reassurance and more like a warning? She reached for my hand. I let her hold it. Please, she said softly. This matters to me. I told her I trusted her, I just didn't realize I was agreeing to something I didn't fully understand. Before him, our relationship felt steady. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just solid. We'd been together a little over 3 years. Long enough to know each other's rhythms. I knew how she took her coffee. She knew when I needed silence after work. We weren't the couple that posted long captions about soulmates. We were the couple who shared grocery lists and argued about what temperature the apartment should be. Comfortable. Predictable. Safe. He had always been part of her life. They met years before I came along. She described him as family without blood. I respected that. Everyone deserves a person who knew them before the world reshaped them. The first time I met him, he shook my hand a little too firmly. Smiled a little too long. But he said all the right things. She's told me a lot about you. I didn't know whether that was reassuring or territorial. Still, I made the effort. Invited him over. Bought extra beer when he visited. Sat through inside jokes I didn't understand. I told myself insecurity was unattractive. I refused to be that guy who saw competition everywhere, and for a long time, nothing seemed wrong, until small things started to feel curated. Inside jokes would stop when I entered the room. Conversations would shift topics mid-sentence. She'd tilt her phone away slightly when texting him, not dramatically, just subtly. When I asked about it once, she laughed. You're imagining things. Maybe I was, because I loved her. And love has a way of smoothing sharp edges until you forget they're there. Still, that request, trust him, hadn't come from nowhere, and I was starting to wonder what I had missed. I wasn't a jealous man by nature. At least, that's what I told myself. I'd been in relationships before where suspicion turned everything toxic. I hated what it did to me, the constant checking, the mental math, the quiet resentment. When I met her, I made a private decision, would never become that version of myself again. She valued independence. I admired that about her. She had her own hobbies, her own circle, her own life outside of us. I didn't want to shrink that world down just to feel secure, so when she started spending more time with him, coffee runs, late-night phone calls, quick meetups after work, I adjusted. I told myself this was maturity. One evening, I came home early and found them in the kitchen. They were laughing hard at something on his phone. When they noticed me, the laughter dropped half a note. Not gone. Just softened. Hey, she said quickly. We were just talking about something stupid. He handed me a drink like a peace offering. You had to be there. That phrase stuck. Later that night, I asked her if everything was okay between us. She looked genuinely confused. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? I didn't have an answer that didn't sound petty. So I dropped it. Instead, I doubled down on being supportive. I encouraged her friendships. I told her I trusted her, and every time I said it, I meant it. At least, I thought I did. but trust isn't just about belief. It's about clarity, and I was starting to feel like I was standing in a room where conversation stopped the moment I walked in. The first real crack didn't come from something dramatic. It came from logistics. She told me he needed a place to stay for a few weeks. Something about his lease ending early. Bad timing. Complicated situation, he doesn't have anyone else close by, she said, watching my face carefully. It would just be temporary. Temporary is one of those words that sounds smaller than it is. I hesitated, but only for a second. If I said no, I'd be the insecure boyfriend. If I said yes, I'd prove I trusted her, so I said yes. The night he moved in, he brought 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. That seemed like more than a few weeks. I noticed it. I didn't comment. At first, it felt almost fun. Like college roommates again. Late night takeout. Background noise of another person in the apartment. He was easygoing. Polite. Overly helpful, but slowly, the space shifted. He'd sit a little too close to her on the couch. She didn't move away. Not intimate. Just familiar. They had shared memories I couldn't access. Stories from before me. Inside references that made me feel like a guest in my own living room. One night, I walked into the kitchen and heard my name. They stopped mid-sentence. She turned around quickly. We were just talking about your birthday coming up. My birthday was 3 months away. I smiled anyway. That was the first time I felt something heavier than insecurity. It felt like exclusion, and the worst part was, I couldn't prove it. Living with him started to feel less like a favor and more like an adjustment I hadn't agreed to. He had opinions about everything. The way I loaded the dishwasher. The shows we watched. Even how she liked her eggs in the morning. She actually prefers them softer, he said once, sliding the plate toward her before I could respond. She laughed. He's right. You always overcook them. It was small. Harmless. But it stacked. I started noticing patterns. If I suggested going out, she'd check with him first to see if he had plans. If I mentioned something private between us, he'd already know about it. One afternoon, I came home and heard raised voices from the spare room. Not angry, intense. I caught fragments. That you can't keep pretending, that he'll figure it out. When I stepped inside, silence dropped like a curtain. She looked pale. He looked irritated. What's going on? I asked. Nothing, she said too quickly. Just stress. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I checked her phone. I wasn't proud of it. My hands actually shook. I told myself I'd just confirm I was overthinking, but what I found felt like confirmation, long threads between them. Late night messages. Lines like, we can't keep this from him forever. He doesn't deserve to find out like this. My chest tightened. There it was. The thing I'd been sensing, an affair. It fit too perfectly. The secrecy. The closeness. The whispers. I put the phone back exactly where it was, and for the first time, trust didn't feel noble, it felt stupid. After that night, everything they did felt loaded. When he brushed past her in the hallway, I watched their shoulders. When she laughed at something he said, I measured the volume. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. I replayed those messages over and over. We can't keep this from him forever. He doesn't deserve to find out like this. It sounded compassionate. Considerate. Which somehow made it worse. If they were sleeping together, at least that would be simple. Ugly, but simple. This felt coordinated. I started pulling back without meaning to. I stayed later at work. I answered her questions with shorter responses. She noticed. Are you okay? She asked one night while we were brushing our teeth. Yeah, I said through foam. Just tired. She studied me in the mirror. I avoided her eyes. Meanwhile, he became almost overly friendly. Offering to grab me coffee. Asking about my day. It felt like guilt disguised as kindness. One evening, he knocked on our bedroom door. Can we talk? He asked. My stomach dropped. This was it. The confession. The awkward apology. Maybe even the speech about how they hadn't meant for it to happen. I followed him into the living room. She stayed in the hallway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. He looked at me like he was about to deliver bad news, and for a split second, I almost felt relieved, because at least then I'd know, but what he said wasn't what I expected. Not even close. He didn't confess to sleeping with her, he didn't apologize, he asked me how much money I had in savings. I actually laughed. A sharp, confused sound. What? He glanced at her. She nodded slightly, like giving permission. Your savings, he repeated. How stable are you financially right now? The question hit harder than any admission of cheating could have. What does that have to do with anything? She stepped forward then, voice tight. We weren't hiding an affair. My pulse was loud in my ears. Then what were you hiding? Silence stretched. Finally, she said it. He's starting a business. It's a really strong opportunity. I wanted us to invest. Us, not me. Not her. Us. I stared at her, trying to process the pivot. So the secret messages were about money? He didn't want to ask you directly, she said. We thought you'd shut it down immediately. He jumped in. It's not a scam. I've done the research. I just need backing. And she believes in it. That sentence landed differently. She believes in it. How much? I asked quietly. They exchanged another look. Most of what you have, he admitted. To start. It was almost impressive how quickly my anger shifted shape. I had braced myself for betrayal of the body. Instead, it was something colder, strategic. You two have been planning to use my savings, I said slowly, without telling me. It's not like that, she insisted. We were going to tell you. We just needed the right moment. The right moment to inform me my money had already been mentally spent, and suddenly, the secrecy made sense, not romantic, transactional, but somehow, it felt just as intimate. I wish I could say I yelled. I didn't. That's what unsettled her the most. I sat down slowly, elbows on my knees, hands clasped. I felt strangely calm. Not because I wasn't angry, but because something inside me had just rearranged itself. You've been discussing my savings, I said carefully. For how long? She hesitated. That was answer enough. A few months, he admitted. Months, the late-night texts. The hushed arguments. The rehearsed request for trust. It had all been preparation. You asked me to trust him, I said, looking at her now. Not you. Him. She swallowed. Because I knew you'd assume the worst. I did assume the worst, I replied. And somehow this feels worse. Her expression shifted, hurt, defensive, confused. It's just money. That sentence changed everything. Just money. To her, it was numbers in an account. To me, it was years of discipline. Overtime shifts. Saying no to things I wanted so we'd have stability. So we'd be safe. He leaned forward. You'd still be part of it. It would benefit all of us. All of us. I looked around the apartment, the couch I bought, the table I assembled, the framed photos on the wall. I suddenly felt like a silent partner in a deal I never agreed to. You already decided, I said quietly. You just needed me to fund it. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped, because that part wasn't wrong. And that was when I understood something painful. This wasn't about trust, it was about alignment, and we weren't aligned at all. He moved out 3 days later, not because I kicked him out. Because I told her I wouldn't invest a single dollar. The shift in the apartment was immediate. Quieter. Cleaner. But not lighter. She kept insisting it wasn't manipulation. That they had only been waiting for the right timing. That she was protecting me from unnecessary stress while they finalized details, protecting me from my own money. I asked, you're being dramatic. Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. What unsettles me now isn't the business idea. It might have succeeded. It might have made us rich. That's almost irrelevant. It's the fact that for months, she built a plan with another man that required my resources but not my awareness. That she defended him more fiercely than she defended transparency. When I told her I needed space, she didn't argue. She just looked disappointed, not heartbroken. Not desperate, disappointed, like I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. We've been living in the same apartment, sleeping on opposite edges of the bed. Conversations are polite. Measured. Strategic in a new way. She still says I overreacted. She says real partnerships require risk. Belief. Unity, and I keep wondering, was I wrong for refusing? Is trust supposed to include financial surrender, or was I right to see that the real betrayal wasn't physical? It was procedural. I didn't lose her to another man's body. I lost her to his influence, so now I'm stuck with a question I can't shake. If the person you love makes plans for your future without you, are you protecting yourself by walking away or sabotaging something that could have worked?